Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start with our feature tonight, Morgan Wootten, who died recently at the age of 88, the greatest high school basketball coach in American history. He coached at DeMatha High School outside Washington, D.C. in Hyattsville, Maryland for 46 years. He won the equivalent of 5 high school national championships. And we've talked about him before when we did the Sid Catlett Jr. podcast, one of his great players, because the 1965 championship was performed by beating Lou Alcindor, a.k.a. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Power Memorial High School with their 71-game winning streak in the greatest high school basketball game of all time. I refer you to the podcast. Morgan Wootten was inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. He was the first high school coach to be inducted, and there are only 3 even now. Besides that, he wrote books about basketball and was considered a great teacher. Here is one of his players, the CBS sportscaster James Brown, who played for him in the late 60s, became a high school All-American, went on to play basketball at Harvard, and now enjoys an extremely successful television and business career.
Whenever talking about Coach Morgan Wootten, it brings a smile to my face. He absolutely one of the most significant influences in my life, and mostly because he walked the talk. Many coaches have great motivational speeches they can deliver. Many will have wonderful cliches meant to inspire in a given instant, if you will, or a given moment during a sporting competition. Morgan walked the talk, walked the walk throughout. He didn't encourage us to do anything that he didn't set the standard for himself. And it started with the kind of people that he wanted to play on his team, the kind of people he selected for his team. And as youngsters, he wanted us to understand what the priorities in life were, first and foremost, which would carry over to sports. He said God was first, family second, school was third, then basketball. He wanted us to understand the importance of prioritizing properly. And if we had those priorities in place, everything else would fall into place. I must say also, where there is the typical notion of a coach who can inspire a team, usually it's of a coach who's going absolutely berserk, engaging in profanity-laced tirades to try to exhort his team or her team to victory. Morgan never did that. Not once did I ever hear him use profanity in inspiring us. He understood how to motivate by understanding what it took to, what a hot button was, if you will, for each individual. We were playing a team, Long Island Lutheran in New York. Great basketball team. We were down by 22 points at halftime. Into the third quarter, we were still down by about 16 points. High school basketball, only 8-minute quarters. In that fourth quarter, we gave it everything we had. We hustled, we dove on the floor for loose balls. We left everything on the court in the sports vernacular. And there was a timeout called with about 30 seconds remaining in the game, and we were down by 6 points. And we came over to the bench, tired, spent, sat down and looked at Coach. He came to each one of us and looked us in the eye, and he was excited. He said, fellas, we got this team right where we want them. We think, wait a minute, we're down by 6. They got the basketball. What do you mean? And he went on to explain in very confident terms. They're complacent now. They think they have the game won. With that in mind, we're going to capitalize on that complacency. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up a full-court press. JB, you're going to be at half court. They're going to attempt to throw the long pass thinking they've got an open spot there. JB, you're quick enough. We've done this in practice every day. He's encouraging me. You're going to steal that pass. Don't put it on the floor because that's wasting valuable time. Catch the ball, pass it down to Zachary, who's going to be going in for a layup. That will take exactly 3 seconds. Now we've got 27 seconds left, and they're going to start to get a little panicky. But now they're going to try to be very conservative. They're going to try to throw a short pass inbounds. Aubrey, you're going to act like you're running back down the court. You're not paying attention. Turn around, steal the ball, lay it back up. We're down by 2. That would have taken another 2 seconds off the clock. Now we've got plenty of time. They're really panicking, and the game is ours. And that's precisely what we did, and we won the basketball game. But that's the way he led by example. No profanity, no tirades. He really maximized what he knew were the strengths that each of the players had on his team and how to manage as well. And he always believed that trying to encourage somebody negatively wasn't the best way to go about doing it at all. And the example that he showed certainly paid dividends because he is in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And it may have changed by now, but at the time he went in, he was the first and only coach at the high school level who went into the Basketball Hall of Fame for what he did solely at the high school level. A remarkable individual.
That's one good man talking about another good man. Well, as long as we're in Washington, D.C., we're going to talk about another good man, Jim Lehrer, who died recently at the age of 85. He was the co-host of the MacNeil-Lehrer Report. He was one of the top journalists in the country. He was also a novelist, a screenwriter, and a playwright, and he was known for his role as a debate moderator during U.S. presidential elections. He had a distinguished career for over 50 years in journalism, which took off, incidentally, at Dealey Plaza in Dallas when he covered the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Here's Jim Lehrer talking about his 50 years in television journalism.
Robin, in the ideal political world, issues are supposed to separate candidates and decide elections, but history has shown that this is not always, if ever, the case. Matters that should be of major concern often get ignored, or minor things get blown out of proportion. Also, issues, large or small, tend to appear and disappear almost overnight.
Americans of all positions and places today mark the death of the most wanted man in the world, Osama bin Laden.
I was a newspaperman in Dallas, Texas, the city editor of the afternoon newspaper, and the local public television station asked me to come aboard as a consultant.
I'm Jim Lehrer, and this is Newsroom.
It was reasonably successful, and I came to Washington and started working for something called Impact, and that's where I hooked up with the former Robert MacNeil.
Within a few months, Jim and I found ourselves anchoring the Watergate Senate hearings together for 47 days and nights. And at 10:02 this morning, Senator Ervin gabbled open hearings that may well become just as historic.
We are beginning these hearings today in an atmosphere of utmost gravity.
And it made us a team. We also became good friends.
Absolutely.
During that time.
Then WNET in New York asked him to start a nightly program. Had the worst title in the history of television. It was called the Robert MacNeil Report. When we began, I was just the Washington correspondent, and then it became a...
By sheer force of personality and journalistic skill.
After about 6 months, the name was changed to the MacNeil-Lehrer Report, and here we sit. The basic concept was a supplement to the nightly news program. So in other words, watch a nightly news program, then come to us for in-depth coverage of one story.
581 political dissidents have either died as a result of being tortured or been executed over the last 4 years in your country.
Torture does not exist anymore in my country.
Would you like to be president of the Soviet Union someday?
If I'm not too old and I have strength.
I think the political parties know they get in Jim an impeccably fair man who listens. I think that's one of Jim's great talents. He listens to what people say.
Give us an example of a handoff of an interview that you felt Jim would do better, or Jim, you felt Robert would do better.
I'll give you an example of a handoff. It really hurt me to hand it off, but with pleasure to watch it done, watch him do it. Just the set of circumstances that are long and boring I won't go into, but I was able to get us an interview with Fidel Castro. Robin went down and did the interview. He knew that story of Castro 10 times better than I did, because he had been there years and years ago. It was something of a abiding interest to him, the whole evolution of Cuba and all of that. I just knew he would do a better job of it.
Senator Dole, speaking of your tax plan, do you still think that's a good idea, the 15% across-the-board tax cut?
Oh, yes, and you'll be eligible. And so will the former president. Yes.
I think the most important interview I did was the one I did with President Clinton. That was the day that the Lewinsky story broke. Shortly before he came in the Roosevelt room, I realized that I had to ask him about it. Would you acknowledge, though, Mr. President, this is very serious business, this charge against you that's been made?
And I will cooperate in the inquiry.
When we first proposed the idea of expanding to an hour, It was not a universally applauded idea.
Some people said, I thought it already
was, right? The mission of the NewsHour, as I see it, is this. Every evening, 5 nights a week, we will tell you, to the best of our professional judgment, what we think are the most important things that have happened since we talked to you last. Robin, the Israeli government has not released many details of the raid itself, but based on a wide variety of other sources, what happened can be pieced together this way.
People often ask me if there are guidelines in our practice of what I like to call MacNeil-Lehrer journalism. Well, yes, there are, and here they are. Do nothing I cannot defend. Cover, write, and present every story with the care I would want if the story were about me. Assume there is at least one other side or version to every story. Assume the viewer is as smart and as caring and as good a person as I am. Assume the same about all people on whom I report. Assume personal lives are a private matter until a legitimate turn in the story absolutely mandates otherwise. Carefully separate opinion and analysis from straight news stories and clearly label everything. Do not use anonymous sources or blind quotes except on rare and monumental occasions. No one should ever be allowed to attack another anonymously. And finally, I am not in the entertainment business. I've been laboring in the glories of daily journalism now for 52 years, 36 of them here at the NewsHour and its earlier incarnations. And there does come a time to step aside from the daily process, and that time has arrived.
Boy, you don't hear stuff like that anymore. Talk about standards and old school. Jim Lehrer. Well, we're going to close tonight with Bartholomew Richard Fitzgerald Smythe, a.k.a. Mr. Peanut, the Planters mascot who's died at the age of 104. This is from Adweek. So long, Mr. Peanut. In a shocking move, Planters, the Kraft Heinz-owned snack brand, has killed off its iconic mascot and a teaser for its big game spot. Mr. Peanut's untimely demise began with a Nutmobile crash followed by falling off a cliff and ending in an explosion. In the 30-second teaser, Mr. Peanut is driving his signature Nutmobile around a winding cliff with actors Matt Walsh and Wesley Snipes in the front and back seats respectively. Walsh spots an armadillo in the road and Mr. Peanut swerves right off the cliff. Walsh, Snipes, and Mr. Peanuts come falling after it, grabbing onto a branch on their way down. But their collective weight is too much for the branch and it starts to snap. In a martyr move, Mr. Peanut sacrifices himself, falling the rest of the way down the cliff onto the top of the Nutmobile, which then explodes. And when will the classic mascot be memorialized? During Super Bowl 2020, naturally. It's with heavy hearts that we confirm Mr. Peanut has passed away at 104 years old, said Samantha Hess, brand manager for Planters, in a statement. He will be remembered as the legume who always brought people together for nutty adventures and a good time. We encourage fans to tune in to Mr. Peanut's funeral during the third quarter of the Super Bowl to celebrate his life. The loss of Mr. Peanut is a major moment for the brand. Planters first introduced Mr. Peanut to audiences in 1916, meaning that the mascot has been around since the midst of World War I, making him one of the longest-standing brand mascots of all time. The spot, which will air during the third quarter of the big game on February 2nd, was produced by VaynerMedia. Planters has also several promotions and activations to honor Mr. Peanut's life, including commemorative pins for fans who spot the Nutmobile on the streets, and a hashtag RIPeanut for fans to share their sympathies. Planters advertised in the Super Bowl last year, too, with a spot starring Alex Rodriguez and Charlie Sheen. That spot marked Mr. Peanut's first Super Bowl appearance, and this year may very well be his last. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. As a final tribute to Mr. Peanut, we're going to close with a song by one of my favorite jazz singers, one of the most underrated jazz singers around, right up there with Ella and Miss Peggy, Anita O'Day. Here she is singing a little bit of The Peanut Vendor.
Peanut, peanut, if you haven't got bananas, don't be blue. Peanuts in a little bag are calling you, you. For at the very break of day, a peanut vendor's on his way.